Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the globe. Joining us today is Haylon Smith, Program Leader in Agribusiness for NZTE. That's New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. They've just commissioned a 150-page report by PricewaterhouseCoopers looking at where in the world are the hot new business opportunities for our dairy and sheep meat. How come those commodities, why not others? Haylon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. Sheep meat and dairy, in terms of our reputation as New Zealand, are seen by our key markets as significant. Obviously, New Zealand's front and centre in both dairy and sheep meat, and when those areas or those parts of the world are looking at New Zealand, they see dairy and sheep meat as being key to what New Zealand produces, and also the technology and the expertise that we have.
And there's no doubt, is there, that global demand for protein is going to be huge. Tell me more.
That's absolutely right. Globally, we think agricultural production needs to increase by 70%. Meat alone needs to double, and that's obviously on the back of increasing population growth of about 2 billion people by 2050. And not only that, but increasing the rise of the middle class, which also means obviously changing consumer behaviour in terms of the consumption patterns of those people, and the fact that they're interested in purchasing and buying products that are protein-based, such as sheep meat and dairy products.
The 5 recommendations, 5 things that you think our businesses could be doing better and smarter to make more money in the world. The first one is something called the New Zealand Global Dairy Fund, the fund. Very simply, what does this mean? How do you see it working?
Sure. So we know that in terms of global protein production, specifically dairy, the New Zealand's seen in terms of our systems as being able to be transferred into other markets. There's a lot of interest in terms of New Zealanders that are going over to these markets to develop dairy farms, and there's a lot of interest from those markets for New Zealanders to go to those markets to help them, one, secure supply in terms of food security, but also in terms of rural economic development as well. The problem we have in New Zealand is, one, capital, in terms of getting the money into those ventures.
We just don't have enough.
That's right. And the other big issue is capability as well.
So bottom line, you're looking at a fund that would largely be from offshore.
A fund that would largely be from offshore, and that's primarily because of the capital constraints that we have here in New Zealand. The fund.
Okay, so here's the question, Haylon. If most of the money comes from offshore, how does that benefit New Zealanders, New Zealand Inc.?
Sure, because the fund would be domiciled in New Zealand, it would be run by a New Zealand company, and the farm managers that fund would then use to implement the farm developments and manage those farms would also be New Zealand companies. That could either be new entities or entities that are already operating in the regions that the report identifies. And
what kind of economic benefits do you think we could get here at home?
Well, for illustrative purposes, the PwC used a fund that was originally $350 million, and they think from that, over a 15-year period, there'd be a return of about $341 million.
And what would this fund specifically be used for, very simply? How would it work?
Very simply, it would work with engaging New Zealand farm development companies that would purchase land in these countries, that would develop those tracts of land into highly profitable and productive dairy farms.
Okay, one of the key markets, of course, you looked at is China. Mm-hmm. No surprises there. Mm-hmm. What does the report recommend? What kind of business should we be doing there?
Well, China's very interesting, obviously, because of their significant rising middle class, as I mentioned up front. Not only that, but China and India, the growth of their middle classes far outstrips most of the other countries around the world. So the recommendations that PwC put forward specific to China was focused really on that area, and one of them was looking at using a single channel to market for our sheep meat exports, primarily lamb. Second was looking at how we can leverage our food safety into China. We know China has incredibly high food safety standards, but whether or not those are actually implemented at the corporate level in terms of the food companies in China, that's probably questionable. And there's an opportunity for New Zealand at a commercial level to go in there and assist those companies.
Yes, we've just discovered, for example, that John Key's picture was being used by somebody in China to sell baby formula. They're pretty good at adopting what they want. They're not totally above board. How do you control something like that?
I think in terms of where we've got to with the report is identifying that joint ventures in China is probably a smart way to go in terms of finding a safe, trusted local partner. So, for example, in food safety, you'd potentially look at working very closely with some of the larger food companies. But you're very correct in that the perception of using the New Zealand fern, for example, like the NZTE fern's often used without permission.
Hijacked, if you like, hijacked.
Exactly. and also the use of what we call government entities like SOEs. The imprimatur of government in those markets is also highly sought after. So one of the other recommendations is obviously looking at leveraging Landcorp in terms of sheep farm developments in China, and that's seen as obviously a big opportunity from the Chinese side because it's an SOE from New Zealand going into China.
Let's talk about South America. Where do you see the opportunities there? It's not dairy, is it? It's largely sheep meat.
No, well, the dairy fund that we were talking about earlier was primarily focused on Brazil as a starting point, and the reason for that is that Brazil has a dairy premium relative to the international dairy price, and that's because domestic production isn't in line with consumption. But yes, you're right that another recommendation talks about a sheep farming, both sheep farming and processing joint venture with a Uruguayan processing company. And that was the complement supply out of New Zealand. So the reason for the joint venture was simply procurement of stock, and that there aren't really significant numbers of sheep in those countries. What
kind of response are you getting from the marketplace here?
At the moment, we're still continuing our consultation phase, so we're working with a number of companies that PwC engaged with through the process. From our perspective, we'll take forward only the recommendations that have significant commercial buy-in. Others may not, and we won't pursue those any further. We'll be working closely with industry to take the recommendations to the next step.
And have you been looking for money offshore, for example, the dairy fund?
Sure. We know that there's a great deal of interest in the dairy fund from offshore. The question will be what the structure looks like back here in New Zealand first, before we actually look at having the discussions in any great detail offshore.
The benefits would be huge if some of these ideas come off, but you also had to assess the risks.
That's right.
What are the risks? How much could it cost us if it doesn't work?
Well, you know, you can view risks in many different ways. You've got in some of these South American countries, there's obviously political risk, there's environmental risk, there's climatic risk for the farming operations themselves, and probably the greatest one, or at least the one that's had been of most difficulty for operators that are over there at the moment, or Kiwis that are over there at the moment, is operational risk, and that you can't simply take New Zealand's farming system into these other countries. There's a significant level of adaptation that you need to implement before you can become successful, and there's a lot of work you need to have with the partners, both in terms of the farm managers, the technology adaptation, and even the local governments and the politics of those regions as well.
Haylon Smith, Program Leader in Agribusiness for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. Stay with Money Talks. More after the break. Come back quick. Welcome back to Money Talks. We're here now with former BNZ Chief Economist turned Director of Financial Focus, Murray Weatherston. Murray, great to have you. And Senior Financial Advisor for Spicer, Jeff Matthews. And Jeff, you're just in from a big trip to North America. What did you pick up there? How's the economy looking, and what the heck were you doing?
I was on holiday, and I got to see both conventions, both the Republican and the Democratic ones. So to me, I think Obama gets in the November elections.
Based on what?
Because the Republican Party has been held captive by the extreme right. So, I met a lot of people from the country club set lots of money. All they want is lower taxes. They're not really worried about social issues. All they want is less taxes. But what they find totally offensive is the fact that the Republicans are saying we want less government, and at the same time they want to get involved in women's bodies, telling them, what constitutes a person. So, I mean, literally they are saying is a sperm and an egg is a person. And anything you do against that is abortion, is against God's law. If you happen to be gay, then, go to hell in a handbasket. So even though you might agree with Mitt Romney on some of the economic issues, the other issues are so extreme, they're to the right of Genghis Khan, is they can't vote for those people.
Yeah, are you getting the feeling, though, that Americans are weighing up the economic crises they're facing or not?
Well, they've been in a tough time for 5 years, and it's simple to kind of blame Obama, but most people remember that, it wasn't him that went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it wasn't him that racked up the huge amount of debt. So there is some sympathy, but things aren't moving as quickly as he would like, and clearly the August job numbers came through were disappointing. I think it was last Friday.
They were, and Murray, let me bring you in here. Non-farm payrolls up just 96,000 for Americans last month, whereas in July they were up by 141,000. They're not even putting a dent into the jobless rate. Now we got 23 million Americans that can't find work.
That's right, and the unemployment rate seems stuck above 8%, and there's probably a lot of discouraged workers who don't appear in the statistics anymore because they said, hey, the chances of getting a job are so little, I'm actually not even going to look for work.
Exactly right. Unemployment rate dropped from 8.3% to 8.1%, but only because Americans have stopped looking.
That's right. And I mean, 8% unemployment is, you know, pretty high by anybody's standards.
Yeah. So if you had to vote for Obama or Romney, who would you pick, Murray?
I would think Obama will win relatively easily come November, isn't it?
What's that going to mean for the economy?
I think it'll just be more of the same. You know, the Americans have got problems. They've got a high level of debt. They've got the high level of unemployment. The housing market, while it might be bottoming out, is still pretty anemic. They've still got lots of houses that have already been built that haven't been sold, and therefore the builders don't have to go out and build a new home. You know, the economy's, you know, I've been saying for ages, I think it's really at stall speed. It wouldn't take much to tip it into recession, and it's pretty hard to see what will actually make it grow, you know, reasonably strongly. And
meantime, I was fascinated to read a story this week out of Chicago, of all places, where teachers are on strike, public school teachers, because they want 19% pay rise, and the city is saying, we can't afford it. What do you make of that? They're making about $76,000 a year already. Are they living in dreamland?
They are living in dreamland. I mean, and that's what offends a lot of Republicans, is that various cities, if it's, you know, or states, California, have negotiated either teachers or firemen or pay increases, you know, over the last 20 years with pension and healthcare benefits that clearly the state can't afford. You have people retiring on almost six-figure pensions, and the question is, there's no money to pay that stuff. You know, who signed up to these deals? But the unions are, especially in the teachers' unions, are really, really strong. I mean, they're against charter schools. They're against grading teachers. They
don't want to be graded or evaluated either.
And that's why, I mean, totally off the subject, the NFL referees are in a strike at the moment on gridiron because of healthcare benefits, and they don't want to be graded. If a Super 12 or Super 16 rugby team, you know, ref has a bad game, he gets demoted and he's on the sideline, or he, you know, goes back and coaches the juniors. In the NFL, you know, they want all these kind of benefits, and it's a ridiculous situation.
Yeah, and who's going to pay for it? And interesting, Marie, in Chicago, they're now saying, the city says, by 2016, they'll be spending more on retirement packages for the teachers than for education funding. Has the world gone mad?
Well, I think lots of people would say the world's gone mad. The fact that we've got debt problems everywhere around the world. When times are good, people are able to negotiate terms. If you're a government or a local authority, you don't actually pay the money out of your own pocket. You know, individual business owners are much tougher on rewards and whatnot for employees. I think they pay them well when times are good, but they've got the ability to cut the rates when times aren't so good.
Yeah, and a little belt tightening.
That's right. And in the government sector, it seems like, hey, I've signed up for this for life, thanks, mate, and my pension's on top of it.
Yeah, they don't seem to worry about it, the future. They just want what they want now. Meantime, it's not just in the States, of course. In China, more disheartening news. Murray.
I mean, we would love, we keep saying this, we would actually love to have the problem the Chinese have. You know, if growth is only going to be 7% or only going to be 6%, we would be saying, hallelujah. You know, we're stuttering along at 0, 1 or 2. But the Chinese economy has been such a strong part of the world growth story. The Chinese have been buying resources from Australia and other places. The Chinese have been making lots of stuff that they've been able to sell out cheaply to the rest of us, and maybe one of the main reasons why inflation's been so low around the world is we've actually been buying the cheaply produced goods out of China. But the growth in China starts to cause a bit of inflation. They get some pressures in there. They stop buying all so much coal and iron ore and all the rest of it.
And we're feeling, we all feel that here at home, and they're feeling it in Australia, certainly. But in China, the government's very worried. Last week, they revealed that they're going to put $150 billion US dollars into infrastructure projects across their country in an effort to stimulate the economy. Is that going to be felt around the world?
Well, I mean, the two things, I guess, that is steel prices for reinforcing and concrete. I mean, those are the two things that are likely to, be affected by. But I mean, 150 billion sounds like a lot, but I mean, compared with all the other projects that they've already got, they were spending over 100 billion on new airfields. and then they've got another 100 billion on rapid rail. I mean, it's just another... The interesting thing is you look at the spend in China on infrastructure, which helps stimulate and gives them a very competitive economy.
Sure.
And you're looking at the states where you've got a freeway, interstate highway system that was built in the 50s that is now 60, 70 years old that needs replacing, and there's no money to replace it. I mean, you drive on a freeway around Boston and the place is falling apart. And so that, you know, that's an issue. Americans want, you know, state-of-the-art infrastructure, but they don't want to pay for it.
Speaking of governments, let's bring it on home and talk a little bit about Mr. Key, our Prime Minister in Vladivostok, Russia, meeting with Mr. Putin. He seems to think that there will be some kind of deal done. I don't think it's looking that encouraging. What do you think, Murray?
Yeah, I don't think it's looking that encouraging either. I think what's happened is Mr. Key's been going around the world trying to do free trade agreements with everybody. The point I would make is that New Zealand basically is an open market to everybody already. I mean,
and has been for years.
Has been since the 1984 reforms. I mean, we used to have the best way ever of stopping imports coming into the country. We had a thing called import licensing. You know, if it was made in New Zealand, you couldn't import it. If it wasn't made in New Zealand, basically you could import it without a tariff. We got rid of import licensing. We didn't have tariffs. I don't think there's very many tariffs on many things. So basically anybody can send everything to New Zealand. What we haven't seen are the gains on the other side of us being able to export the stuff that we make, you know, pretty well. You know, grass-fed agricultural products.
Yeah.
We can't get them into the rest of the world.
Nope.
And you know, it's really the same problem that we've had since Britain joined the EEC and whenever that was, the 60s and 70s, 73.
Yeah. And Britain as well remains heavily subsidised when it comes to agricultural commodities. Everybody is except us. So really,
that's right. And
we're somewhat naive in that regard.
Do you think we are? And I see this morning he's been in Japan and he's making encouraging noises saying, "Oh, we think we're going to get a free trade deal with Japan, but they got to be some of the most subsidized and protected agricultural products in the world." Correct?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, the day he can say he's been successful in the free trade stuff is when we can get our beef, our dairy products, our lamb into any country in the world without barrier.
And meantime, our dollar continues to rocket up and up. We'll talk about that after the break. Thanks, gentlemen. Coming up after the break, future-proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our experts point out what's coming up. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks, and now it's time for future-proof. What's on the radar for our guest? And I want to start by asking you, Murray, what about this New Zealand dollar? They're saying it's going to hit 90 and in 4 to 5 years could be on parity with the US dollar.
Yeah, well, that's one person's view that was published in the papers earlier this week.
More than one person's view, I would suspect.
Yeah. I think there'll be a lot of exporters who will be really grizzling if it hits 90 cents.
Well, what would it mean for our export manufacturers?
Export manufacturers, I could see the RIP stories in the newspaper.
It would be devastating.
It would actually be extremely devastating, in my opinion. Well, it would be very good for those of us who travel overseas and for people who are importers.
Yeah, that's right. And if you want to buy a big fancy washing machine or a flat screen TV, it's good news. But for the exporters, it's crap.
That's right.
And we have to export our way out of the a slow economy. We can't just borrow the money and have a party like we did in the early part of this last decade. I mean,
So we know Thursday is our Reserve Bank Governor's swan song, if you like, and Alan Bullard will be joining APEC. Could that be good for us?
Well, it won't be bad. I think he's done a reasonable job as Governor of the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, a lot of people a lot of analysts seem to think that he has done a pretty good job. But is it time now to think about perhaps intervening in the currency, the way it's creeping up?
New Zealand doesn't have the firepower to be able to go in and affect the market. I mean, Japan, the Bank of Japan does it for a couple of days and the currency moves a little bit, and a week or 2 weeks back where it was again. If the markets think that the New Zealand dollar is a good place to be, I mean, if you're the Swiss National Bank, you're probably buying New Zealand bonds at the moment because you're getting a positive return on your money. If you were to buy Swiss bank bonds, less inflation, you're getting a negative return. I mean, and these people have got trillions and trillions of dollars. So the Reserve Bank could sit down in Wellington and try and fight that, but they can't.
They can't fight it in the market.
No.
So they don't have enough money to go to drive the dollar down because the market will bet against them.
They don't have a big enough bazooka.
But they do have one weapon, in my view,
that?
And that is interest rates.
Yep.
And you have to say, why has the New Zealand dollar been so strong for so long? And there's several parts of the story, but I think one of them is that commodity prices for the, probably most of the last 10 years, commodity prices have been very good relative to where they'd been. So commodity prices is part of the story. But we've consistently run higher interest rates than the rest of the world.
Yep.
And we're doing it against, to beat inflation. Now, inflation really isn't a problem at this point in time almost anywhere in the world. So that was the 80s problem, was inflation, 70s and 80s. Inflation everywhere is low, but we still continue in New Zealand because the Reserve Bank seems to have this real fear about what's going to happen to Auckland house prices, that we have to run much higher interest rates than the rest of the world. And I think if the authorities actually did want to get a lower dollar, and in my view, we must be about the only country at any time in the world that's tried to build exports and import competitors or substitutors with a high dollar, right? Everyone else who tries to build their export industries and their import substitution industries, they do it with a low dollar. The Chinese, the Japanese used to do it. The Americans try to do it. Everybody tries to do it. So we have had this anti-inflationary policy that's been run.
It's old news.
And that's old news. And it won't happen. But it would be very interesting to see if our official cash rate was 1.5% and not 2.5%. I don't think the dollar would be at 81.90 cents American as it is today.
74 cents.
What do you reckon, Jeff?
Oh, look, I agree with Murray. I mean, we're fighting the wrong fight. The easiest way would be to lower interest rates. People would move their money out. The currency would drop, make imports more expensive. It would help exporters. I mean, how do you build an export business with a high dollar? I mean, it's not possible. What
are you going to be keeping your eye on, Murray, over the next 7 days?
Well, I think there's big news out of Germany on Thursday morning New Zealand
time.
That's right,
the Constitutional Court.
It has the ability to either settle the markets down or to throw a hand grenade into the pond.
Now the question is all about whether or not Germany should be funding the bailouts, in effect.
Well, it's whether the German government has the constitutional authority to help fund the bailouts.
Yeah, a lot of Germans don't like it.
But given, I'd have to say, given where the markets are trading, almost on the eve of it as we speak, you'd have to think that the Constitutional Court is going to say it is okay for them to do it. Because if there was any fear that the Germans couldn't participate in the bailout, I think the markets would be into huge turmoil.
How about you, Jeff? What are you going to be keeping your eye on?
We're not far from it. Will be the end of September. We get into October when we start looking at the third quarter for US companies, how their profit announcements are. And again, we're 59 days away from the US election. So the next 6 to 8 weeks is going to be interesting. One is, given the slowdown kind of globally, are companies still making reasonable profits? And two is, is it going to become more clear-cut as to who's going to win the election? Whoever wins the election has issues to deal with. And I mean, part of the problem in the US is this freeze on government between Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter who gets elected. If you've got the opposition controlling the Congress and the Senate, you're like a lame duck.
You're stymied. So they continue to be mired down, and it's business as usual, or not. Thanks to my guests, Haylon Smith, Jeff Matthews, and Murray Weatherston. Be sure to check out our website at country99tv.co.nz for the latest updates on rural developments here at home and abroad. Meantime, 11 years ago this very day, the United States was reeling from a terrorist attack of unspeakable proportions. Today, on the other side of the world, a New Zealand woman, Marla Kavanagh, sang the American national anthem at a dawn ceremony at Ground Zero. Lest we forget.
God bless America. Land that I love.
God. Now remember, oh my God.
Beside
Oh my God, another plane has just hit.
This has to be deliberate, folks.
America, my home, sweet home.
Keep the faith. See you next time.